In the pre-dawn darkness of a Beijing winter morning, the sound of footsteps echoes through the vast courtyard of the Forbidden City. The security guard calls out his arrival, as tradition demands, before unlocking the ancient gates. A ritual performed for centuries, though few know its true origin. Legend whispers that the announcement warns the restless spirits within to retreat to their hiding places, for Beijing's imperial palace harbors more than treasures and artifacts. At precisely 5 p.m. each evening, as those same gates close with a resonant thud, flocks of crows circle overhead in an eerie dance, as if the city itself possesses a consciousness that awakens with the setting sun. This daily ritual of acknowledgement between the living and the dead serves as a fitting metaphor for Beijing itself, a city where the visible and invisible, the official and clandestine, the living and the departed, exist in perpetual tension. If you use these videos to fall asleep, subscribe so you don't miss any new ones. Leave a comment with your thoughts on the video and any suggestions you have for future ones. For over 6 centuries, China's capital has served as the stage for some of history's most elaborate conspiracies, sophisticated intelligence operations, and deadly power struggles. Beneath its grand palaces and broad avenues lies a labyrinthine world of secret passages, underground cities, hidden chambers, and covert operations that have shaped not only Chinese history, but global geopolitics itself. From the Ming dynasty's feared secret police, who could arrest emperors' relatives without trial, to Cold War nuclear bunkers capable of sheltering 1 million people, to modern surveillance systems that track every facial expression on Beijing's streets, the Chinese capital represents perhaps the world's most extensive and continuous experiment in state secrecy and authoritarian control. Understanding Beijing's hidden history means peeling back layers of deception, propaganda, and deliberate obfuscation to reveal the mechanisms by which power has been wielded, preserved, and transferred in China's political center. The depth of Beijing's secrets spans not just centuries but physical dimensions, from ancient burial chambers 20 meters underground to imperial spy networks that extended across continents. These stories of espionage, murder, supernatural encounters, and clandestine operations provide crucial insights into how China's rulers have maintained control through sophisticated intelligence networks, while also revealing the human cost of such systems on both the watchers and the watched. The crimson walls of Beijing's Forbidden City have witnessed more blood than perhaps any palace complex on Earth. The foundation of China's secret history was laid in 1368 when Zhu Yuanzhang, the peasant who would become the Hongwu Emperor and founder of the Ming dynasty, created the most feared institution in Chinese history, the Jinyue, or embroidered uniform guard. Unlike conventional armies or police forces, the Jinyue answered only to the emperor himself and wielded unprecedented authority to overrule judicial proceedings and prosecutions with full autonomy in arresting, interrogating, and punishing anyone, including nobles and the emperor's relatives. The psychological impact of the Jinyue extended far beyond their actual numbers. These men, resplendent in their golden yellow uniforms with distinctive tablets worn on their chests, moved through Beijing like living reminders of imperial omnipresence. They carried the dreaded embroidered spring knife, Xiu Chundao, a weapon that became synonymous with summary justice and extrajudicial execution. The mere sight of their distinctive regalia could silence a crowded market or empty a tea house within moments. From their headquarters west of what is now Tiananmen Square, the Jinyue operated a network that penetrated every level of Chinese society. The organization grew with terrifying rapidity. From an initial force of 500 agents to approximately 14,000 within just 3 years of its establishment. But numbers alone cannot convey the pervasive atmosphere of surveillance they created. As one historical account describes, many Jinyu agents posed as servants of officials, transmitting every molecule of their private thoughts back to the emperor, creating a climate where every word of courtiers was recorded in great detail. The Jinyu's methods were as psychological as they were physical. They understood that the mere possibility of surveillance was often more effective than actual monitoring. A mandarin might discover that his own servant had been recording his conversations for months, or that his most trusted friend was actually an imperial spy. This systematic erosion of trust created what scholars today recognize as one of history's earliest examples of a true surveillance state. The complexity of Beijing's imperial espionage deepened dramatically with the rise of eunuch power, creating what amounted to competing intelligence agencies within the palace walls. In 1420, Emperor Yongle established the Eastern Depot, Dongchang, a rival intelligence organization run exclusively by eunuchs. Unlike the Jinyue, who served the emperor directly, the Eastern Depot operated with a different mandate, initially investigating suspects before handing them over to the Jinyue for interrogation, but eventually developing its own tactical forces and prisons, and becoming so powerful that even officials were ordered to kowtow to the depot's leaders. The eunuch's rise to power was rooted in the peculiar dynamics of imperial court life. Castrated as children or young men, these individuals could serve in the inner palace without posing a sexual threat to the emperor's concubines. Yet this supposed weakness became their greatest strength. Because they could not father children, eunuchs were theoretically immune to the usual temptations of founding dynasties or building family power bases. Ironically, this limitation freed them to accumulate influence in ways that traditional officials could not. The most dramatic example of eunuch power was Wei Zhongxian, 1568 to 1627, who during the reign of the weak Ming Emperor Tianqi became so powerful that he was expected to found his own dynasty by the adoption of his nephew into the imperial family. Wei, working with his partner Madame K, created a shadow government that controlled appointments, military decisions, and even imperial succession. So complete was his dominance that he was referred to as the 9,000 years old, a title just one step below the emperor's own 10,000 years old. The eunuch's intelligence networks operated with sophisticated precision. They maintained external residences outside the palace, where ordinary citizens would attempt to buy access to the imperial court. These houses, often doubling as Buddhist temples, became informal intelligence centers where information was bought, sold, and traded. The eunuchs accumulated detailed dossiers on every significant figure in Beijing, creating leverage that they used ruthlessly to maintain and expand their influence. The psychological impact of eunuch surveillance was particularly insidious because it exploited the intimacy of palace life. Unlike the Jinyue, who operated openly as instruments of imperial authority, eunuchs served the emperor's personal needs, helping him dress, serving his meals, attending his private meetings. This intimacy gave them access to the emperor's most unguarded moments, while simultaneously positioning them as confidants who might report any unwise statements or dangerous thoughts. The violence that permeated Beijing's imperial palace complex reached its most shocking expression in the palace plot of Renyin Year in 1542, when 16 palace women attempted to murder Emperor Jejing by strangulation. The conspiracy reveals not only the desperation of those trapped within the imperial system, but also the sophisticated security measures that both protected and imprisoned everyone within the Forbidden City's walls. The assassination attempt unfolded like a scene from a nightmare. On that fateful night in 1542, the emperor was staying in Consort Duan's quarters when a group of palace women approached, ostensibly to serve him. Led by concubine Ning of the Wang clan, they had carefully planned their moment, when the emperor would be most vulnerable, surrounded by what he believed were his most loyal servants. The women tied a hemp rope around his neck and attempted to strangle him, but in their terror and inexperience, the rope was mistied, failing to kill the emperor and instead only causing him to faint from fright. The aftermath was swift and merciless. When Zhang Jinlian, one of the conspirators, lost her nerve and alerted Empress Fang to the failed assassination, the empress faced a dilemma that would define the brutal logic of imperial survival. She ordered all of them, including Zhang Jinlian, who had informed her of the attack, to public death by slow slicing. Even Consort Duan, who had not participated in the plot, but in whose quarters it occurred, was sentenced to death simply because the empress decided that she had been involved with the plot. The execution method chosen, death by slow slicing, was designed not just to kill, but to terrorize. The bodies of the conspirators, along with those of imperial concubine Ning and consort Duan, were displayed on hooks for all palace residents to see. The terror extended beyond the palace walls. 10 members of the women's families were also beheaded, while a further 20 were enslaved and gifted to ministers, with their properties seized and given to the families of officials loyal to the emperor. The conspiracy's deeper implications become clear when we consider its motivation. These women were not random rebels, but members of the emperor's own household, who had been driven to desperation by his obsession with creating red lead pills for immortality, a process that required the blood of young women. Their failed assassination attempt reflected the systematic brutalization of palace life, where human beings were reduced to mere components in the emperor's quest for eternal life. The paranoia that followed the 1542 assassination attempt fundamentally altered the character of imperial palace life. Emperor Beijing ordered restrictions on girls entering the palace to be tightened, and in subsequent years, 300 girls between the ages of 11 and 14 were selected as new palace women, with the age limit eventually reduced to as young as 8 years old. These children, torn from their families and imprisoned within the palace walls, represented the human cost of imperial security measures. The sophistication of Beijing's imperial intrigue reached its culmination in the mysterious death of Emperor Guangxu on November 14, 1908, a murder that remained officially unsolved for exactly 100 years until modern forensic science revealed the shocking truth. The emperor died just 22 hours before his aunt, the powerful Empress Dowager Cixi, in what appeared to be a remarkable coincidence that aroused immediate suspicion among those who understood palace politics. The official story claimed that the 38-year-old emperor had died of natural causes, but rumors of assassination circulated almost immediately. These suspicions were well-founded, for Guangxu had been a prisoner in his own palace for 10 years, held under house arrest by Cixi following his failed attempt at constitutional reform in 1898. The emperor had led a very vigorous program of reform that threatened the established order, after which he had been deposed by the Empress Dowager and had then been held in their sort of palace arrest from that time forward. The breakthrough came a century later when Chinese scientists conducted forensic analysis of the emperor's remains and clothing. They discovered lethal levels of arsenic, specifically 201 times higher than the normal amount, found in samples of the emperor's hair and clothing. The poison had been administered with sophisticated precision, likely placed in a simple bowl of yogurt, according to eyewitness testimony that had been preserved through oral tradition. The account of the emperor's final moments reads like a scene from a spy thriller. Pu Liang, minister of rituals in the Qing court, witnessed a eunuch emerging from Empress Dowager Cixi's room carrying a bowl. When asked about its contents, the eunuch replied, "Yogurt." The Empress Dowager asked me to give it to the emperor. 2 hours later, palace residents heard weeping from the emperor's quarters and shouts that the emperor is dead. This methodical assassination reveals the deadly precision of palace intelligence operations. The murder required intimate knowledge of the emperor's daily routines, access to his personal quarters, and the ability to administer poison without detection. Most importantly, it required the complicity or coordination of multiple palace insiders, demonstrating that even emperors were not safe from the very surveillance systems designed to protect them. Beneath the magnificence of Beijing's Forbidden City lies a network of secret passages and hidden chambers that rivals anything constructed by medieval Europe's most paranoid monarchs. Known as the Tiger Caves, Hushui, these underground tunnels represent one of the most sophisticated security and surveillance systems ever built into an imperial residence. Despite their fearsome name, these passages were actually built for good luck and safety purpose, serving multiple functions that reveal the complex logistics of maintaining imperial power. The Tiger Caves served as discreet highways for palace staff, who were generally not allowed to walk on the royal road. This separation was not merely ceremonial, but reflected the careful segregation that made surveillance possible. By forcing servants and administrators to use hidden routes, palace security officials could monitor and control all movement within the complex. The tunnels also functioned as shelter from fire during emergencies and provided secure routes to transport construction materials without disrupting imperial ceremonies or exposing the palace's defensive secrets. The engineering sophistication of these passages becomes apparent when we consider their water management function. The Tiger Caves helped maintain the stability of the palace foundation by serving as culverts that transferred water to keep water levels equal on both sides of the Danby Bridge, protecting the structural integrity of the palace complex. This dual-purpose design exemplifies the Chinese approach to imperial architecture. Every element served both practical and security functions. Historical accounts provide glimpses of how these passages functioned in daily palace life. Emperor Tianqi of the Ming Dynasty used the tunnels for recreational purposes, playing hide-and-seek with the palace eunuchs, where he liked to hide in tiger caves best. However, the emperor was always caught, because he had a sachet in his sleeve that allowed the eunuchs to track him by scent. This anecdote reveals both the playful and sinister aspects of palace surveillance. Even the emperor's recreational activities were monitored and controlled. Archaeological investigations have revealed the true extent of the Forbidden City's hidden infrastructure. Additional underground chambers throughout the complex served various storage and utility functions, from food preservation to treasure storage. More significantly, many of these spaces connected buildings through discrete tunnels that allowed emperors and high officials to move between structures without exposure to weather or security risks. This network represented a sophisticated security system that protected imperial residents while simultaneously enabling covert movement and surveillance. The most ambitious secret infrastructure project in Beijing's history emerged during the darkest period of the Cold War, when Chinese leaders, terrified by the prospect of nuclear war with the Soviet Union, ordered the construction of a vast subterranean city beneath the capital, Dixiacheng, or the underground city, built between 1969 and 1979, represents one of history's most extraordinary civilian defense projects. A fully functional underground civilization designed to shelter Beijing's population during nuclear apocalypse. The scope of construction was staggering. 85 square kilometers of tunnels and chambers, extending 8 to 18 meters, 26 to 59 feet under the surface. The project required the excavation of millions of cubic meters of earth and rock, much of it carried out by ordinary Beijing residents who were told they were contributing to the city's defense against foreign invasion. The workers labored in secrecy, with many never knowing the full extent of what they were building. The underground complex was designed as a fully functional underground civilization that included schools, hospitals, factories, restaurants, theaters, sports facilities, and even an ice skating rink. The planners envisioned a subterranean society that could function independently for months or even years, complete with its own power generation, water purification, and food production capabilities. At its peak capacity, the system could shelter up to 1 million people in case of war. The network originally featured over 90 hidden entrances scattered across Beijing, many disguised within shops and homes. These entrances were concentrated mainly in shops and businesses on Qianmen south of Tiananmen Square, allowing discreet access to the underground network. The camouflage was so sophisticated that many Beijing residents lived above entrance points without knowing of their existence. Shopkeepers might operate their businesses for years above secret blast doors that could seal off tunnel sections during emergencies. The psychological impact of the underground city extended beyond its practical defensive purpose. Its construction required the participation of hundreds of thousands of Beijing residents, creating a shared secret that bound the city's population together in common purpose, while simultaneously demonstrating the government's power to mobilize massive resources for hidden projects. The very existence of such an enormous concealed infrastructure sent a clear message about the state's capabilities and the seriousness of external threats. Despite its enormous scale and sophisticated engineering, the underground city was never used as tensions faded and became a forgotten relic of a war that never came. Sections of the complex were briefly opened to tourists in 2000, providing a rare glimpse into this hidden world, but the facility has been closed for renovation since at least February 2008, with uncertain prospects for future access. Today, portions of the tunnel system serve as storage facilities, workshops, and in some cases, underground markets, while other sections remain sealed and forgotten. The underground city's legacy extends beyond its physical presence. It demonstrates the Chinese leadership's willingness to undertake massive secret projects without public debate or oversight, a capability that has clear implications for contemporary infrastructure projects. The construction techniques and organizational methods developed for the underground city informed subsequent tunnel building projects throughout China, including subway systems and modern military installations. The assassination attempt against Emperor Beijing in 1542 was not merely a failed coup, but a window into the systematic brutalization that characterized life within Beijing's imperial palace. The conspiracy, involving 16 palace women, led by concubine Ning, emerged from the emperor's obsession with Taoist alchemy and his quest for immortality through the consumption of red lead pills, a pursuit that required the blood of young women. The preparations for the assassination required extraordinary coordination and courage. The women had to overcome not only their physical limitations against the emperor, but also the psychological conditioning that made questioning imperial authority almost unthinkable. They chose their moment carefully, when the emperor was in Consort Duan's quarters, relaxed and surrounded by what he believed were his most loyal servants. The actual attempt reads like a scene of desperate amateur theater. The women approached the emperor under the pretense of service, but when the moment came to act, their inexperience became apparent. They tied a hemp rope around his neck and attempted to strangle him, but the rope was mistied, failing to kill the emperor and instead only causing him to faint from fright. In that crucial moment of hesitation and failure, Zhang Jinlian's nerve broke completely, and she ran to alert Empress Fang, a decision that sealed the fate of all 16 conspirators. The names of the conspirators, carefully recorded in imperial records, reveal the human dimensions of this tragedy. Chen Zhuhua, Deng Jingxiang, Guan Meishu, Huang Yulian, Liu Miaolian, Su Zhouyao, Wang Shulan, Xing Kuilian, Shu Qiuhua, Yang Kuiying, Yang Jinying, Yang Yuxiang, and Yao Shukui. Each name represents a young woman driven to such desperation that death seemed preferable to continued existence within the palace system. Empress Fang's response demonstrated the remorseless logic of imperial survival. She ordered all of them, including Zhang Jinlian, who had informed her of the attack, to public death by slow slicing. The execution method was chosen for maximum psychological impact. Slow slicing, Ling Qi, was designed to create prolonged agony while serving as a spectacle that would deter future conspiracies. Even Consort Duan, who had not participated in the plot, was executed simply because the attempt occurred in her quarters. The aftermath extended far beyond the palace walls. 10 members of the women's families were also beheaded, while a further 20 were enslaved and gifted to ministers, with their properties seized and given to the families of officials loyal to the emperor. This collective punishment was designed to demonstrate that betrayal of the emperor carried consequences not just for individuals, but for entire family lines, a principle that would echo through Chinese political culture for centuries. The murder of Emperor Guangxu in 1908 represents the culmination of imperial assassination technique, combining political sophistication with forensic precision that remained undetected for exactly 100 years. The crime occurred during one of the most turbulent periods in Chinese history, when the Qing dynasty faced external threats from foreign powers and internal pressure for constitutional reform. Emperor Guangxu had been a prisoner in his own palace since 1898, when his attempt at rapid modernization, the 100 Days of Reform, was crushed by a coup led by Empress Dowager Dixie. For 10 years, the emperor lived under house arrest, completely isolated from government affairs, while Cixi ruled in his name. The emperor's death, just hours before Cixi's own demise, was presented as a remarkable coincidence, but palace insiders immediately suspected murder. The assassination method demonstrates remarkable sophistication. Rather than using crude poisons or obvious violence, the murderers employed arsenic, specifically enough to create levels 201 times higher than the normal amount in the emperor's system. The poison was administered through food, most likely in a simple bowl of yogurt, according to eyewitness testimony preserved through oral tradition. The crucial witness was Pu Liang, minister of rituals in the Qing court, whose account was passed down orally through his family. Pu Liang saw a eunuch emerging from Empress Dowager Cixi's room, carrying a bowl, and asked about its contents. The eunuch replied, "Yogurt. The Empress Dowager asked me to give it to the emperor." 2 hours later, the palace erupted in grief, with cries that the emperor is dead. The forensic evidence, revealed by Chinese scientists a century later, confirms not only that Guangxu was murdered, but that the assassination was carried out with remarkable precision. The arsenic levels were carefully calculated to ensure death, while avoiding the obvious symptoms that might have immediately revealed poisoning. The timing, ensuring Guangxu died before Cixi, was crucial to preventing any possibility of the emperor outliving his captor and potentially reversing her policies. This methodical assassination reveals the sophisticated intelligence capabilities that existed within the palace system. The murder required intimate knowledge of the emperor's daily routines, access to his personal quarters, and the ability to administer poison without detection. Most crucially, it required coordination between multiple palace insiders, including eunuchs, with access to both Cixi's quarters and the emperor's food supply. The Forbidden City's reputation as one of China's most haunted locations stems not merely from folklore, but from the documented violence and tragedy that saturated its history. According to legend, the curse began on the very day the palace was officially opened by Emperor Yongle in 1421. The evil emperor slaughtered over 2,800 people in his harem when attempting to suppress an alleged sex scandal on New Year's Eve during the official opening ceremonies. The massacre was so extensive that it fundamentally altered the spiritual atmosphere of the palace complex. Within a few years of the opening, a devastating fire ravaged the Forbidden City, burning over 250 buildings to the ground and killing numerous people. Despite the palace being covered with protective charms and lucky symbols, they failed to prevent the destruction, leading Emperor Yongle to believe that it was a punishment for his actions. The emperor sank into depression and died in 1424, convinced that he had brought a curse upon the imperial seat. The spiritual significance of these events cannot be understood without considering Chinese beliefs about ghosts and the supernatural. According to traditional Chinese culture, those who meet an unjust death often return as vengeful spirits, which helps explain why the Forbidden City is believed to be filled with heavy yin energy. The massive scale of violence within the palace walls created what believers describe as an accumulation of restless spirits seeking justice for their unjust deaths. Modern security personnel have reported inexplicable phenomena that seem to confirm these supernatural beliefs. Guards have described hearing women scratching at glass and weeping during the night, sounds that investigators have been unable to explain through conventional means. The management of the palace complex officially denies the existence of paranormal activity, but the consistency of such reports across decades suggests phenomena that transcend simple imagination or superstition. The architectural features of the palace were designed with supernatural considerations in mind. All doorways in the Forbidden City feature high thresholds that visitors must step over carefully. According to traditional beliefs, they are there because ghosts can't jump, and they'd be trapped inside the room. Similarly, the gatekeeping demons that stand on practically every Chinese doorstep serve as guardians whose job is to keep evil spirits from entering through the door. Among the most persistent supernatural legends of the Forbidden City is the spirit of Empress Dowager Cixi, who ruled China for nearly 50 years until her death in 1908. According to guards and visitors, her spirit continues to wander the palace corridors at night, striving to safeguard her empire even after death. Witnesses describe encounters with a regal woman clad in Qing dynasty garb, meandering through the halls at night. The persistence of Cixi's spirit is particularly significant, given her extraordinary political power and her resistance to change during her lifetime. She was responsible for blocking virtually every attempt at modernization, from constitutional reform to military modernization, and her influence extended to every aspect of imperial administration. According to believers in the supernatural, her spirit remains bound to the palace because her political mission was never completed. She died knowing that the dynasty she had dedicated her life to preserving was collapsing. The sightings of Tixi's spirit follow a consistent pattern. Witnesses describe a figure in elaborate Qing court dress, moving through the palace halls with purposeful determination, as if still conducting the business of governance. The apparition is most commonly seen in areas that were central to her political activities: the throne rooms where she held court, and the private chambers where she planned her strategies for maintaining power. The most tragic supernatural presence in the Forbidden City involves the spirits of concubines from the Ming and Qing dynasties who met violent or unjust deaths. The palace was not only a hub of power, but also a site of intrigue, betrayal, and sorrow, where concubines who lost favor or became entangled in political schemes often met tragic ends, whether through execution or suicide. These women's spirits are believed to manifest their presence through sounds rather than visual apparitions. Visitors and guards report hearing mournful cries resonating in the stillness of the night, sounds that seem to echo from the quarters where the imperial harem once lived. The cries are described as expressing profound sadness and desperation, reflecting the hopelessness experienced by women who were essentially prisoners within the palace walls. The supernatural activity is particularly intense in areas associated with the most tragic episodes of palace history. The quarters where the 16 palace women planned their assassination attempt against Emperor Jing are said to be especially active, with reports of whispered conversations and the sounds of footsteps in rooms that should be empty. Believers interpret these phenomena as evidence that the spirits of the executed women remain bound to the location of their final desperate act. Among the most haunted areas of the Forbidden City is the so-called Cold Palace, Gong, where emperors sent concubines who had fallen from favor. This area of the complex served as a prison for women who had once enjoyed imperial favor, but had been cast aside due to political changes, personal conflicts, or simple imperial whim. The Cold Palace became a realm of living death, where women were forgotten by history, but unable to leave their prison. The supernatural activity in the Cold Palace is described as particularly intense because it represents the concentration of despair and hopelessness. Women sent there knew they would never again see their families, never bear children who might elevate their status, and never escape the palace walls. Many chose suicide rather than endure decades of isolation and neglect, adding to the accumulation of tragic spirits believed to inhabit the area. Modern investigations have attempted to explain the supernatural phenomena through scientific means. Some researchers have noted that the special red wall paint formula used throughout the Forbidden City contains iron oxide that combines with other materials to produce a memory effect under certain conditions that can reproduce scenes that once occurred. According to this theory, the walls themselves might be capable of recording and replaying traumatic events, creating apparitions that seem supernatural, but actually represent a form of environmental memory. The summer of 1900 brought to Beijing one of the most extraordinary secret society uprisings in world history, as the Yihequan, righteous and harmonious fists, transformed from scattered martial arts groups into a movement that would challenge the combined might of 8 foreign powers. The Boxers, as they became known to Western observers, represented something far more complex than simple anti-foreign sentiment. They embodied a sophisticated network of secret societies that had been operating in China for centuries. The Boxer movement emerged from older secret society traditions, with many of their constituent organizations having taken part in the White Lotus Rebellion of 1796 to 1804. Their beliefs represented a complex mix of nativist beliefs, blending Taoist naturalism, Buddhist spirituality, Confucian ethics and politics, and a strong anti-foreign bent. This syncretic ideology allowed them to appeal to different segments of Chinese society while maintaining a coherent anti-imperial message. The secret societies that formed the backbone of the Boxer movement operated with sophisticated organizational structures that enabled rapid communication and coordination across vast distances. They used coded language, ritual ceremonies, and membership oaths that created bonds stronger than family ties. The societies maintained safe houses, weapons caches, and communication networks that allowed them to mobilize thousands of fighters within days of receiving orders. The Boxers' most distinctive characteristic was their belief in ritual invulnerability. Members believed they could make themselves impervious to physical harm, including bullets, through practicing martial arts and consuming magical substances. This belief was not merely superstition, but represented a sophisticated psychological technique for overcoming the natural fear of death that paralyzed most opponents of foreign military technology. By consuming bits of paper with magic phrases on them, Boxers convinced themselves they were protected by supernatural forces. The movement's slogan, "Support the Qing, exterminate the foreigners, Fu Qing Mie Yang," represented a brilliant political calculation that transformed what might have been simple banditry into a patriotic movement. By supporting the imperial government while targeting only foreign influences, the Boxers positioned themselves as defenders of Chinese civilization rather than rebels against lawful authority. The Boxer Rebellion reached its climax during the 55-day siege of Beijing's legation quarter from June to August 1900, when approximately 900 foreign diplomats, soldiers, and civilians found themselves trapped in a small compound, while thousands of Boxer fighters and imperial troops attempted to destroy every trace of foreign presence in the Chinese capital. The siege transformed Beijing into a battlefield where centuries-old traditions of warfare met modern military technology. The Boxers employed traditional weapons, swords, spears, and martial arts techniques, alongside captured modern rifles and artillery pieces. Their tactics combined conventional assault with psychological warfare, designed to break the morale of the defenders through constant noise, threats, and displays of captured foreign equipment. The foreign defenders found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to materialize from the city's population itself. Boxers could disappear into Beijing's maze-like hutongs and reappear miles away, using their intimate knowledge of the city's layout to conduct guerrilla warfare against occupying forces. The secret society networks that supported the Boxers provided intelligence about foreign movements, safe houses for wounded fighters, and supplies that kept the rebellion functioning even under intense military pressure. The psychological impact of the siege extended far beyond Beijing itself. For the first time in history, Chinese forces had successfully trapped and threatened to eliminate the entire foreign diplomatic community in China's capital. The siege demonstrated that Chinese resistance movements could coordinate sophisticated military operations and challenge foreign military superiority through superior numbers, local knowledge, and willingness to sacrifice. The international response to the Boxer Rebellion forever changed Beijing's character. The eight-nation alliance that lifted the siege included troops from Britain, France, Germany, Russia, Japan, Austria-Hungary, Italy, and the United States, the largest international military intervention in Chinese history. The foreign occupation that followed introduced new intelligence networks, surveillance systems, and security measures that would influence Beijing's development for decades. Among Beijing's most notorious haunted locations stands Kaone No. 81, an abandoned mansion in the Chaoyangmen neighborhood that has become a magnet for ghost hunters and urban explorers. The building's sinister reputation stems from a tragedy that occurred during the Chinese Civil War, when it was allegedly the residence of a Kuomintang, nationalist official, whose departure during the communist advance left behind a woman, either his wife or lover, who died under mysterious circumstances. According to local legend, the woman was crestfallen when her husband or lover left when the communist forces were approaching the city, and she either committed suicide or died of despair in the mansion. Her death under such tragic circumstances created what believers describe as a powerful, vengeful spirit that has haunted the building ever since. The mansion gained such notoriety that it became the setting for the 2014 Chinese-language horror film, The House That Never Dies. The building itself has become a symbol of Beijing's hidden political history. During the chaotic period of the Chinese Civil War, many wealthy and politically connected individuals fled the city, leaving behind properties that became monuments to the sudden collapse of the old order. Kione number 81 represents thousands of similar properties throughout Beijing, places where the lives and dreams of individuals were destroyed by political upheaval. Urban explorers who have ventured into the abandoned mansion report experiences that seem to confirm its supernatural reputation. They describe sudden temperature drops, unexplained sounds, and the sensation of being watched by an unseen presence. Some visitors report seeing apparitions of a woman in 1940s dress wandering through the empty rooms, as if still waiting for someone who will never return. The mansion's significance extends beyond its ghostly reputation to represent the hidden costs of political transformation. The tragedy that created its supernatural legend reflects the human consequences of the political upheavals that have repeatedly swept through Beijing throughout its history. The building stands as a reminder that behind every major political change lie individual stories of loss, abandonment, and despair. On a sweltering July day in 1971, Beijing witnessed one of the most consequential secret diplomatic missions in modern history, when Henry Kissinger arrived for clandestine negotiations that would fundamentally reshape global geopolitics. The mission, kept secret from even the U.S. intelligence community, represented the culmination of a complex back-channel diplomacy that had been developing since 1969 through intermediaries in Pakistan. The secrecy surrounding Kissinger's visit was extraordinary, even by Cold War standards. The Chinese leadership understood that any leak could sabotage both Nixon's domestic political position and China's relationships with communist allies like North Vietnam and North Korea. To maintain operational security, Kissinger's party was told they were visiting Pakistan for health consultations, while in reality, they were flown secretly to Beijing for what would become 17 hours of intensive negotiations with Premier Zhou Enlai. The Chinese approach to the negotiations revealed sophisticated understanding of American domestic politics and psychological manipulation techniques. Premier Zhou repeatedly emphasized time constraints, telling Kissinger that the time that is left for President Nixon is quite limited, while mentioning that he had a great pile of letters from other U.S. politicians on my desk asking for invitations. These statements were carefully calculated to heighten American anxiety about political competitors who might preempt Nixon's diplomatic breakthrough. The Chinese orchestrated the entire negotiating environment to maximize American psychological dependence. They arranged meetings in settings designed to inspire gratitude, awe, and helplessness, while simultaneously gathering intelligence on U.S. domestic political dynamics. Zhou's negotiating style combined grandiosity with intimacy, presenting China as a great power, while also creating personal bonds with individual American negotiators. The intelligence exchanges during Kissinger's visit revealed the extraordinary level of trust that the Chinese were willing to extend to their former enemies. Kissinger briefed Chinese leaders in detail on Soviet troop movements. Details so sensitive even the U.S. intelligence community was kept out of the loop. This sharing of classified military intelligence demonstrated that both sides viewed the Soviet Union as a greater threat than each other, fundamentally altering the balance of Cold War power. The operational security measures taken during the visit would influence Chinese intelligence practices for decades. The Chinese demonstrated their ability to conduct high-level diplomacy in complete secrecy while maintaining detailed records for future reference. Zhou even suggested that they should tape record their talks to protect China's credibility with allies who might question Chinese commitment to communist solidarity. Throughout the 1970s, Beijing became the epicenter of one of the Cold War's most intense intelligence conflicts, as Soviet and Chinese spy services fought a shadow war that escalated alongside border tensions and ideological disputes. The KGB's counterintelligence operations revealed the sophisticated methods employed by Chinese intelligence services to penetrate Soviet territory and influence Soviet citizens. Chinese intelligence operations demonstrated remarkable innovation in their use of cultural and commercial channels for espionage activities. KGB investigations discovered that Chinese intelligence was using anti-Soviet publications, numbering in thousands, that were smuggled into the Soviet Union by the Chinese crews on the Beijing-Moscow railroad line. These materials were hidden in secret compartments on the train cars, and sometimes left in places where Soviet passengers could accidentally pick them up. The railroad route between Beijing and Moscow became a crucial intelligence battleground where both sides attempted to recruit assets, plant surveillance devices, and intercept communications. Chinese operatives used their legitimate commercial presence to establish networks of informants among Soviet citizens who worked on or traveled via the railroad. The KGB responded with extensive surveillance operations that monitored every Chinese national entering Soviet territory. The sophistication of Chinese intelligence operations impressed even their adversaries. Soviet counterintelligence officers noted that Chinese agents demonstrated remarkable patience and long-term planning capabilities, often spending years developing relationships before attempting to gather sensitive information. The Chinese approach emphasized cultural affinity and ideological persuasion rather than monetary incentives, making their operations particularly difficult to detect and counter. The intelligence war extended beyond simple espionage to include sophisticated disinformation campaigns designed to undermine Soviet influence in the communist world. Chinese intelligence services produced forged documents, spread rumors about Soviet intentions, and attempted to convince other communist parties that Moscow had betrayed true Marxist-Leninist principles. These psychological operations required detailed understanding of communist political dynamics and careful coordination across multiple countries. Beijing houses the headquarters of China's Ministry of State Security, MSS, in the Jiwan area of Haidian District, from where one of the world's largest and most sophisticated intelligence services conducts operations that span the globe. The MSS operates with well over 100,000 employees, including all its provincial and municipal arms, making it comparable in size to the CIA and KGB combined. The MSS's mission, according to former operative Li Fengji, encompasses counterintelligence, the collection of secrets and technology from other countries, and repressing internal dissent within China. However, its most important mission is to control the Chinese people to maintain the rule of the Communist Party. This dual focus on external intelligence and domestic surveillance represents a continuation of imperial Chinese traditions that viewed security threats as inseparable from political control. Recent incidents have provided glimpses into the MSS's operational methods and internal vulnerabilities. In 2012, an executive assistant to MSS Vice Minister Liu Zhongwei was found to have been passing information to the CIA, an incident that infuriated Hu Jintao and led to a tightening on information dissemination and increased counterintelligence activities in Beijing and abroad. This penetration revealed that even China's most secretive organizations remained vulnerable to foreign intelligence operations. The MSS's global operations have adapted to the digital age while maintaining traditional human intelligence capabilities. Chinese intelligence services are accused of conducting breathtaking efforts to steal technology and economic intelligence and to influence foreign politics in Beijing's favor. These operations combine cyber espionage with traditional agent recruitment, creating hybrid campaigns that can gather intelligence while simultaneously influencing target countries' political processes. Contemporary MSS operations include surveilling and conspiring to harass Chinese-American pro-democracy dissidents and spying on Hong Kong pro-democracy activists, Taiwan independent supporters, and Uyghur and Tibetan activists. These activities demonstrate how Beijing's intelligence services extend their reach far beyond China's borders to monitor and control overseas Chinese communities and political opposition movements. August 1966 transformed Beijing into a killing field, as student Red Guards, encouraged by Mao Zedong's call for violent revolution, turned on their teachers, neighbors, and anyone associated with old culture in an orgy of violence that would haunt the city for decades. The month that became known as Red August saw 1,772 people murdered in Beijing, with many of the victims being teachers who were attacked or killed by their own students. The violence began at Beijing's most prestigious schools, where students who had been taught to revere their teachers suddenly turned on them with unprecedented brutality. At Beijing Teachers University Girls Middle School, students tortured 5 school officials, including Vice Principal Bian Zhongyun, who became one of the first victims of Red Guard violence. The students splashed ink on the clothes of these 5, forced them to wear high hats, hung boards with their names crossed out by red X's on their necks, forced them to kneel on the ground, hit them with nail-spiked clubs, scalded them with boiling water. The torture of Bian Zhongyun lasted for 3 hours before she lost consciousness and was put into a garbage cart. 2 hours after being sent to the hospital across the street, she was later found to have been dead for some time. Her death represented not just individual tragedy, but the systematic destruction of educational authority and cultural transmission that had sustained Chinese civilization for millennia. The psychological transformation that enabled students to murder their teachers reflected sophisticated indoctrination techniques that turned natural respect for authority into revolutionary hatred. Students were encouraged to view their teachers not as individuals, but as representatives of a corrupt system that had to be destroyed completely. The personal relationships that had previously protected teachers from student violence were deliberately severed through ideological training that redefined loyalty to the Communist Party as the highest moral obligation. The scale of violence during Red August was carefully documented by internal Communist Party reports that recorded daily death tolls and methods of execution. According to investigators who later examined internal documents, the actual number of deaths was reported to the central authorities every day through several information collecting offices. However, these statistics were never published, allowing later Communist Party leaders to minimize the extent of the carnage and avoid accountability for the systematic murder of Beijing residents. The violence of Red August was only the beginning of a systematic campaign to eliminate hidden class enemies from Beijing's population. In 1968, the campaign to cleanse the class ranks reached its peak in Beijing, where 68,000 of various hidden class enemies were investigated, leading to thousands of deaths and the destruction of countless families. This campaign represented one of history's most extensive efforts at social engineering through terror and mass surveillance. The hidden class enemies targeted during the cleansing campaign included anyone with connections to the pre-revolutionary order: former landlords, businessmen, intellectuals, religious believers, and their children and grandchildren. The campaign operated on the premise that class background was inherited and that individuals could never escape their family's political history. This created a system where birth determined guilt, and no amount of revolutionary enthusiasm could provide complete protection. The methods used to identify and eliminate these enemies combined traditional Chinese surveillance techniques with modern totalitarian practices. Neighborhood committees, work units, and even family members were encouraged to report suspicious behavior or hidden class backgrounds. Children were taught to inform on their parents, spouses on their partners, and friends on each other, creating a society where trust became impossible and survival required constant vigilance. The psychological impact of the cleansing campaign extended far beyond its direct victims to terrorize Beijing's entire population. The random and arbitrary nature of accusations meant that anyone could become a target at any moment. Respected party members found themselves denounced by subordinates, while individuals who had enthusiastically supported the revolution discovered that their past associations made them vulnerable to persecution. The campaign's most insidious aspect was its use of forced confession and self-criticism sessions that required victims to fabricate crimes they had never committed. These sessions served multiple purposes. They provided justification for punishment, created detailed records that could be used against victims later, and forced participants to internalize their own guilt and worthlessness. The psychological trauma of these experiences often proved more damaging than physical torture. One of the most tragic aspects of Beijing's Cultural Revolution was the systematic separation of families through the rustication campaign that sent millions of urban youth to remote rural areas. The policy, presented as educational opportunity for city youth to learn from peasants, actually served to break up family units that might resist political control while simultaneously removing potential sources of urban unrest. Beijing families faced impossible choices as the government demanded that their children volunteer for rural service that often lasted for decades. Parents who attempted to protect their children were accused of bourgeois sentimentality and counter-revolutionary thinking. Children who resisted were labeled as lacking revolutionary consciousness and faced severe punishment. The campaign created a generation of young people who grew up separated from their families and traditional cultural transmission. The psychological impact on both parents and children was devastating. Parents lived with the constant anxiety of not knowing whether their children were safe or would ever return home. Children struggled to survive in harsh rural conditions without family support, while attempting to maintain their urban identities and educational aspirations. Many never returned to Beijing, creating permanent family separations that lasted until death. The rustication campaign also served intelligence purposes by dispersing potential political opposition and creating a generation of young people who owed their eventual return to urban areas to government favor. Former Red Guards who had committed violence during the Cultural Revolution found themselves sent to remote areas where they could not organize resistance to the new political order. This geographic dispersion prevented the formation of opposition movements, while simultaneously creating a population dependent on government permission for basic life choices. In the spring of 1989, Beijing's Tiananmen Square became the epicenter of the largest pro-democracy movement in Chinese history, as hundreds of thousands of students and citizens occupied the symbolic heart of Chinese political power for 7 weeks in a desperate attempt to force democratic reforms. The movement represented the culmination of growing discontent with government corruption, economic inequality, and political repression that had been building throughout the 1980s. The protest movement began in April 1989 following the death of former Communist Party General Secretary Hu Yaobang, who had been purged in 1987 for supporting student demonstrations. Students used Hu's death as an opportunity to express broader grievances about China's political system, demanding freedom of speech, press freedom, and an end to government corruption. The movement quickly expanded beyond university campuses to include workers, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens who saw the protests as an opportunity to demand fundamental political change. The occupiers of Tiananmen Square created a temporary autonomous zone complete with its own governance structures, communication systems, and supply networks. Students established a command structure that coordinated activities across the vast square, organized food distribution, maintained sanitation, and conducted negotiations with government representatives. The protest camp included medical stations, broadcasting equipment, and even a replica of the Statue of Liberty that symbolized the protesters' democratic aspirations. The international attention focused on Tiananmen Square created a unique moment of transparency in Beijing's normally secretive political system. Foreign journalists and diplomats provided real-time coverage of events, while the protesters themselves used fax machines, telephones, and emerging computer networks to communicate with supporters worldwide. For the first time in Chinese history, the government faced sustained domestic protest under intense international scrutiny. The government's initial responses revealed deep divisions within the Chinese leadership about how to handle the crisis. Reformist officials like Zhao Ziyang attempted to negotiate with the protesters and find peaceful solutions, while hardliners pushed for immediate military action to clear the square. These internal debates played out in public as different government representatives delivered contradictory messages about the government's intentions and the legitimacy of the protests. By late May 1989, the Chinese leadership had decided that the Tiananmen protests represented an existential threat to Communist Party rule that could only be resolved through military force. On May 20th, the State Council declared martial law, and as many as 300,000 troops were mobilized to Beijing in the largest military operation in the capital since the founding of the People's Republic. The military mobilization revealed the government's sophisticated understanding of both crowd control and international opinion management. Rather than immediately attacking the protesters, military leaders spent weeks positioning forces around Beijing while attempting to minimize international attention. The delay allowed for careful planning of operations designed to clear the square quickly while controlling information about casualties and methods used. The troops assembled for the Tiananmen operation included elite units from multiple military regions, ensuring that commanders could rely on soldiers with no personal connections to Beijing residents. The government understood that local troops might refuse orders to fire on civilians, so units were brought from distant provinces, where soldiers would view protesters as abstract enemies rather than neighbors and fellow citizens. Intelligence operations preceding the military assault included extensive surveillance of protest leaders, infiltration of student organizations, and monitoring of international media coverage. The government used these intelligence capabilities to identify key organizers, understand protest decision-making processes, and planned targeted arrests that would decapitate the movement's leadership structure. The psychological preparation for the military assault included intensive political education sessions designed to convince soldiers that they were defending Chinese civilization against foreign-sponsored subversion. Troops were shown propaganda films depicting the protesters as tools of Western intelligence services, attempting to overthrow Chinese socialism. This ideological conditioning was essential for overcoming soldiers' natural reluctance to fire on civilian protesters. The final assault on Tiananmen Square began on the evening of June 3, 1989, as military columns converged on Beijing's center from multiple directions in a coordinated operation designed to clear the square and surrounding areas of all protesters. The operation, planned with military precision, employed overwhelming force against civilians armed only with stones, bottles, and improvised barricades. The 38th Army's advance along Chang'an Avenue became the bloodiest confrontation of the night, as troops encountered determined resistance from Beijing residents who attempted to block military vehicles with their bodies. At 10:30 p.m., after being pummeled by rocks thrown by protesters, the 38th Army troops opened fire with live ammunition, using expanding bullets, prohibited by international law for use in warfare between countries. The killing was systematic and indiscriminate. Soldiers raked apartment buildings with gunfire, and some people inside or on their balconies were shot. The military assault targeted not only active protesters, but any civilians who happened to be in the area, creating terror that extended far beyond the immediate battlefield. The use of expanding bullets, designed to cause maximum tissue damage, demonstrated the military's intention to inflict casualties that would deter future resistance. The final clearing of Tiananmen Square itself occurred in the early morning hours of June 4th, when remaining protesters found themselves surrounded by tanks and armed soldiers. The protesters who had maintained their occupation for 7 weeks faced the choice between surrender and death, with most choosing to withdraw rather than face certain annihilation. However, many were killed during the withdrawal, as military forces continued firing on fleeing civilians. The true casualty figures from the Tiananmen massacre remain one of Beijing's most closely guarded secrets. Chinese authorities have never released official death tolls, but declassified British diplomatic cables report that up to 10,000, according to released, declassified UK documents, were killed during the operation. These figures, provided by British Ambassador Sir Alan Donald in a secret cable on June 5, 1989, suggest casualties far exceeding official Chinese claims of minimal civilian deaths. The immediate aftermath of the Tiananmen massacre involved one of history's most extensive efforts to control information and manipulate public memory about a political event. The Chinese government implemented what amounted to a systematic campaign to erase the protests and massacre from public consciousness, while simultaneously punishing anyone who attempted to preserve accurate records. The information control operation began within hours of the military assault, as government censors worked to prevent any accurate reporting about casualties or the methods used to clear the square. No editions of the People's Daily were available in Beijing on the 5th of June, despite assurances that they had been printed, while many shops, offices, and factories were not able to open as workers remained in their homes. The government's control over media and public spaces allowed it to create an information vacuum that persisted for days while official narratives were developed. International journalists who had covered the protests found themselves expelled from China or subject to harassment that made continued reporting impossible. The government used visa restrictions, equipment confiscation, and physical intimidation to prevent foreign media from gathering evidence about the massacre's true scope. Even decades later, International news organizations face restrictions when attempting to report about the Tiananmen protests from within China. The domestic suppression of memory involved both formal censorship and informal social pressure that made discussion of the events dangerous for ordinary citizens. Educational curricula were revised to eliminate any mention of the 1989 protests, while internet censors developed sophisticated systems to detect and block any online references to the events. The government's control became so complete that many young Chinese citizens today have never heard accurate accounts of what occurred in their capital city. The psychological impact of the cover-up extends beyond simple information control to represent a fundamental challenge to the relationship between citizens and state in contemporary China. By forcing an entire population to participate in collective amnesia about a traumatic historical event, the government demonstrated its power to control not just behavior, but memory itself. This cognitive control represents perhaps the ultimate expression of authoritarian power, the ability to determine not just what people can do or say, but what they are allowed to remember. Beijing's transformation into one of the world's most surveilled cities represents the culmination of centuries of authoritarian control techniques, updated with digital technology that would have astonished even the most paranoid Ming emperor. The city's modern surveillance infrastructure builds directly on imperial traditions of comprehensive monitoring, while adding capabilities that extend government observation into every aspect of citizens' daily lives. The foundation for Beijing's digital surveillance system was established during the 2008 Summer Olympics, when Chinese officials had transformed Beijing into a giant fortress, with surface-to-air missiles take aim at the sky above the Olympic stadiums, while surveillance cameras mounted on light poles scan sidewalks, and police officers search thousands of cars and trucks entering the city. The Olympics provided justification for implementing surveillance technologies that remained in place long after the Games concluded. The scale of Beijing's current surveillance network defies easy comprehension. As of 2019, 200 million monitoring CCTV cameras of the Skynet system had been put to use in mainland China, 4 times as many as the surveillance cameras in the United States. State media claims that Skynet is the largest video surveillance system in the world, utilizing facial recognition technology and big data analysis, capable of tracking individual citizens throughout their daily activities. The system's sophistication extends far beyond simple video monitoring to include comprehensive data fusion capabilities that combine visual surveillance with financial transactions, internet activity, travel records, and social media monitoring. This integration allows authorities to construct detailed profiles of individual citizens' behavior patterns, political preferences, and social relationships. The technology can identify anomalous behavior and predict potential security threats before they materialize into actual actions. The psychological impact of comprehensive surveillance operates through the same principles that made imperial spy networks effective. The knowledge that observation is possible, even when actual monitoring may be intermittent. Citizens modify their behavior not because they know they are being watched, but because they know they might be watched at any moment. This creates self-censorship and conformity that extends government control far beyond its actual surveillance capabilities. Beijing's control over information has evolved from imperial censorship systems to digital monitoring capabilities that allow real-time content filtering across all electronic communications within China. The Great Firewall represents not just technical filtering, but comprehensive content control that shapes what information Chinese citizens can access and share. The system's sophistication includes automated content analysis that can detect and block sensitive material within seconds of its creation or sharing. Keywords, images, And even abstract concepts can trigger filtering systems that prevent content from reaching intended audiences. The technology adapts continuously as users attempt to circumvent controls, creating an ongoing arms race between censors and citizens seeking information access. The human cost of digital censorship extends beyond simple information control to affect social relationships and cultural expression. Citizens must constantly calculate the political implications of their communications, leading to self-censorship that extends into private conversations and personal relationships. The knowledge that all digital communications are potentially monitored creates social anxiety that affects everything from business relationships to romantic partnerships. The international implications of Beijing's information control systems include efforts to extend censorship beyond China's borders through economic pressure on foreign companies and governments. Chinese authorities use market access as leverage to force international businesses to comply with Chinese censorship standards, effectively extending Beijing's information control into global communications networks. October 18, 1860, remains one of the darkest dates in Beijing's cultural history, when British and French forces systematically looted and then burned the Yuan, the old summer palace, in an act of cultural destruction that Chinese leaders still describe as their ground zero. The palace, occupying more than 3.5 square kilometers and representing the pinnacle of Chinese architectural and artistic achievement, was destroyed in an orgy of looting that lasted 3 days and involved 4,000 foreign soldiers. The old summer palace had been constructed over 150 years by successive Qing emperors as their private retreat, combining traditional Chinese garden design with European architectural elements that reflected the cosmopolitan nature of the Qing court. The complex included not only palaces and pavilions, but also libraries containing priceless manuscripts, art galleries with centuries of accumulated treasures, and workshops where the finest Chinese craftsmen created objects of unparalleled beauty. The scale of destruction was methodical and total. Lord Elgin, Britain's High Commissioner to China, commanded his forces to annihilate both the Summer Palace and the Old Summer Palace, as retaliation for the torture and death of British envoys during negotiations. The palace was so large, covering more than 3.5 square kilometers, 860 acres, that it took 4,000 men and 3 days to destroy it. The soldiers worked systematically, first looting everything of value before setting fires that reduced centuries of cultural achievement to ash and rubble. The cultural impact of the destruction extended far beyond the physical loss of buildings and artifacts. The old summer palace had represented China's ability to synthesize different cultural traditions into uniquely Chinese forms of expression. Its libraries contained historical records and literary works that existed nowhere else, while its art collections included pieces that had been accumulated over centuries of cultural development. The destruction represented not just theft, but cultural genocide, the deliberate elimination of a civilization's memory and creative achievement. The stolen treasures from Yuan now fill museums and private collections throughout Europe and North America. Current estimates suggest that over 1.6 million looted Chinese antiquities currently reside in museums across the world, with more than half originating from Yuan. Among the most famous stolen pieces are the 12 bronze animal heads from the palace's famous zodiac fountain, which have become symbols of cultural loss and colonial exploitation. The systematic looting of Beijing's cultural treasures during the 19th and early 20th centuries created what scholars describe as the greatest art heist in history, a dispersal of Chinese cultural objects that continues to complicate international relations and cultural identity. The Chinese government now operates sophisticated programs to track and recover stolen artifacts, using diplomatic pressure, legal action, and occasionally covert operations to reclaim pieces of their cultural heritage. The challenge of recovery is complicated by the fact that many stolen pieces have changed hands multiple times and are now held by museums and private collectors who claim legal ownership under their local laws. International art markets have historically shown little concern for the provenance of Chinese artifacts, creating a trade in cultural objects that continued well into the 21st century. Recent archaeological discoveries have revealed the extent of cultural destruction that occurred during Beijing's periods of foreign occupation and internal upheaval. Archaeological teams working throughout the Beijing area have uncovered evidence of systematic looting that extended far beyond the well-known destruction of the summer palaces to include temples, private residences, and even burial sites that were stripped of valuable objects. The Chinese government's efforts to recover stolen cultural objects represent a broader campaign to reconstruct national cultural identity after centuries of foreign intervention and internal political upheaval. Each recovered artifact serves not just as a museum piece, but as a symbol of restored national dignity and cultural continuity. The recovery campaigns have become important elements of Chinese diplomacy, with artifact returns often accompanying broader political agreements. Recent archaeological work in Beijing has revealed layers of hidden history that challenge conventional understanding of the city's development and cultural significance. The discovery of Zhongdu, the capital city of the Jin dynasty, 1115 to 1234, beneath modern Beijing's financial district, represents one of the most significant urban archaeological finds in Chinese history. The Zhongdu excavation uncovered 2,500 square meters of the ancient capital, revealing sophisticated defensive features including protruding walls, which were used as defensive facilities, with 3 faces, which can greatly broaden the guard's vision and enhance the overall defense capabilities. These architectural innovations demonstrate engineering sophistication that influenced later Chinese fortress design and urban planning. The archaeological methodology employed in these excavations represents the cutting edge of Chinese archaeological science. Teams used various high-tech measures to better detect and record cultural relics, including collecting soil samples for further analysis of plant pollen to understand the agricultural conditions, and analyzing unearthed animal specimens to study ancient living environments. The project utilized detailed measurement and mapping and 3D laser scanning, laying a solid foundation for future restoration and display of cultural relics. Additional discoveries have revealed previously unknown aspects of Beijing's military history. Recent research has uncovered ruins of over 130 hidden doors on the Great Wall through close to centimeter resolution continuous shooting. These hidden passages were designed to be highly compatible with the local topography and served multiple functions, including routes for scouts to pass through and channels for communication between inside and outside of the Great Wall. The implications of these archaeological discoveries extend far beyond academic interest to affect contemporary political and cultural debates. Each new find provides evidence for Chinese arguments about territorial sovereignty, cultural continuity, and historical legitimacy. The careful documentation and preservation of these discoveries reflects the Chinese government's understanding that archaeological evidence serves important political functions in addition to scholarly ones. As the evening crows complete their daily ritual above the Forbidden City, and the last tourists exit through gates that have witnessed centuries of conspiracy, Beijing settles into the shadows where its true character emerges. the city's visible grandeur. Its broad boulevards, imposing government buildings, and carefully maintained historical sites represents only the surface layer of a metropolis whose real significance lies in what remains hidden from public view. Beijing's secret history reveals a continuous thread connecting ancient imperial surveillance systems to modern digital monitoring networks, showing how techniques of authoritarian control adapt to new technologies while maintaining consistent objectives, preserving state power, monitoring potential threats, and projecting authority both domestically and internationally. The Jinyue's golden uniforms and embroidered spring knives served the same fundamental purpose as today's facial recognition cameras and internet censorship algorithms, creating an atmosphere where citizens understand that resistance carries unacceptable risks. The human cost of these systems extends far beyond their immediate victims to affect entire populations who must navigate daily life under comprehensive surveillance. From palace women driven to attempt assassination by systematic brutalization, to students who murdered their teachers during the Cultural Revolution, to contemporary citizens who self-censor their communications to avoid algorithmic detection. Beijing's hidden history demonstrates how authoritarian control shapes not just behavior, but consciousness itself. The physical layers beneath Beijing's streets, from imperial secret passages to Cold War bunkers to modern fiber optic networks, reflect the city's role as both fortress and stage, where power is simultaneously protected and displayed. The underground city's 85 square kilometers of tunnels represent not just military engineering, but psychological warfare, demonstrating the states to mobilize massive resources for projects that citizens never fully understand. The same logic applies to contemporary infrastructure projects, whose true purposes may not become apparent for decades. The international dimensions of Beijing's secret history illuminate how China's capital has served as a global intelligence center, where world-changing decisions are made in closed rooms by leaders whose true intentions remain hidden from public scrutiny. From Kissinger's secret negotiations to contemporary cyber espionage operations, Beijing continues to host activities that reshape international relations while maintaining plausible deniability about their true scope and objectives. Perhaps most significantly, Beijing's secret history reveals the resilience of authoritarian control systems that adapt continuously to changing circumstances while maintaining core functions. The transition from imperial eunuch networks to Communist Party surveillance apparatus to digital monitoring systems demonstrates institutional continuity that transcends political upheavals and technological revolutions. Understanding these patterns provides crucial insights into contemporary Chinese governance and its likely future evolution. The ghosts that allegedly haunt the Forbidden City serve as fitting metaphors for Beijing's relationship with its hidden past, memories that cannot be completely suppressed despite official efforts to control historical narratives. Like those supernatural spirits, the truths about Beijing's secret history continue to manifest in unexpected ways, revealing themselves to those who know how to look beyond official facades and recognize the patterns that connect past and present. Beijing's secret history matters not just for understanding China, but for recognizing how authoritarian systems operate more generally. The techniques of surveillance, information control, and population management, pioneered in China's capital, have influenced similar systems worldwide, making Beijing's hidden dimensions relevant to anyone concerned about the global spread of authoritarian governance methods. As Beijing continues its transformation into what Chinese leaders describe as a world-class city, its secret dimensions adapt and evolve while maintaining their essential characteristics. The city that gave the world comprehensive bureaucratic surveillance, sophisticated intelligence operations, and systematic information control continues to innovate in these areas, while carefully concealing the full extent of its capabilities from both domestic and international observers. The true test of Beijing's secret history will be whether future generations can learn from these concealed experiences to build more transparent and accountable forms of governance, or whether the city's authoritarian innovations will continue spreading globally as models for maintaining elite control in an increasingly connected and complex world. The answer to this question may determine not just China's future, but the trajectory of global political development in the 21st century. In the end, Beijing's secret history serves as both warning and guide, revealing the sophisticated methods by which authoritarian power maintains itself, while also demonstrating the human cost of systems that prioritize state control over individual freedom. Understanding these hidden dimensions provides essential knowledge for anyone seeking to preserve democratic values and human dignity in an age when surveillance technology makes comprehensive population control easier than ever before in human history.